LifeAudio.
Hello, and welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast with Trisha and Michelle. We're just two friends reading through the Bible chronologically and encouraging you to do the same. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, the Daily Bible Podcast, or go to our website, dailybiblepodcast.net. We're going through the 1-year chronological Bible when we have links in our show notes and at our website. It's not too late to start.
And I love just getting to know new friends who are reading through the Bible with us. It is truly becoming a highlight of my day, just hearing what people have to say.
It's so exciting. It really is. Well, yesterday, Trisha, we finished Genesis. Well, of
Yay!
course, you know that. You were right there with me. Yay! And today we are reading Job. And the account of Job is traditionally thought to have taken place around the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, or maybe just shortly thereafter. So let's put us back in that mind frame and that time frame of where they were. And so let's just think that as God was promising Abraham that he would have descendants as many as the stars in the sky, as many as the sands along the seashore, that he was also working in another man's life in a very mighty way. And when you think about it that way, like, wow, yes, there's a lot going on that God was working on. There's a lot going on. So today we read Job 1, 2, 3, and 4.
There was once a man named Job. That's how this book starts.
It's almost like a fairy tale. You know, when you start reading, I just think of a fairy tale book, like what my mom read to me. There was once
upon a time. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. So these 7 words open up one of the most challenging books of the Bible, or at least in my opinion, is one of the most challenging books of the Bible. Job lived in Uz, and God called him completely blameless. Job feared God, and he stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he was rich. He had thousands of sheep and camels and oxen and donkeys. He had lots of servants, and he was one of the richest people in the area. When his children had feasts, Job would even offer burnt offerings just in case they sinned while they were partying. So he was trying to take care of himself and all his kids too.
Just in case.
Just in case. So one ordinary day on earth, we also get a glimpse into heaven. Members of the heavenly courts presented themselves before the Lord, and Satan showed up with them. The Lord actually points out Job to Satan. So it was the Lord who initiated this, calling him the finest man on earth, and that was in Job 1:8. Satan insists that Job is only good because God protects Job and blesses him. And God allowed Satan to test Job. He said, do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. And that was in chapter 1, verse 12. So Satan took this seriously, and soon all Job's oxen and donkeys were raided, and the farm hands were killed. Then fire fell from heaven and burned up Job's sheep and all the shepherds. Okay, that's like barbecue and Then more raiders stole his camels and killed his servants. And then finally, a powerful wind knocked down the buildings and killed all of Job's children. I mean, and this happened like one servant would come and tell him, I'm the only one that survived to tell you, and then another one. So in the matter of just a few hours' time, Job gets all this bad news, like all at once. And Job tears his robe and he mourns, but he still praises God, and he does not blame God. So then Satan again goes before God, and God again points out Job. And this is what he says. He has maintained his integrity, even though you urged me to harm him without cause. Satan is then allowed to strike Job with terrible boils. And I mean, all over his body. I can't imagine boils. And even though Job's wife urges him to curse God, he doesn't. And this is in chapter 2, verse 10. He says, should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? And then Job's 3 friends show up. and they sit with Job in his grief and pain. Job then curses the day of his birth, and he is seriously troubled. Eliphaz, who's one of his friends, starts telling Job that Job has helped others, and basically Job needs to take his own counsel, which means Job should still have hope. Eliphaz also says that he had a spirit visit him, like this is like a bad dream turned real. I don't know, spirit declaring that no mortal is innocent before God. And while this is true that no man or woman has been pure before God since Adam and Eve, I'm not sure how helpful it was to hear this in Job's distress. I mean, he already has all these horrible things happening,
Yeah.
and here's his friend saying no one's innocent before God. And we'll later see that his friend's common theme was that you must have done something to deserve all this.
Yeah, that common theme that runs through the rest of the book of Job. It's like, okay, Job, what happened? What'd you do? But I want to back up just a second, and that was, I love how Job's friends rushed in to sit with him in his grief.
Yeah.
And also I'm seeing Job must have been a very important, well, he had to have been a very important man to have amassed all that he had.
Yeah.
But he had to have been known. He was known because it says that his friends traveled, and they sat with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No words. How hard is that for you, Trisha? When I come to you and say, life is, something's happened and I'm grieving over something. It's really hard to just shut your mouth and just sit there. It's so hard. And then we see in verse 13, then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words.
So intense.
First of all, he had to have been suffering greatly. And then secondly, they just sat there with no words. No words. I don't know.
I think that was probably the most helpful, at least to start. Yeah.
And as I think of walking through something so hard, first of all, I don't know of anyone who has walked through something this hard, but walking with somebody who's walking through something so hard, being able to just sit there, and it feels so awkward. I used to work I used to volunteer with hospice patients a lot. And so it feels so awkward not to say something, especially at end of life when you're in with the family and when, with their loved one is dying. It feels so unnatural. And yet my supervisor would always say, it's your physical presence that means the world. So just go in there and hold hands. You don't have to say anything. And that was freedom to me. It still feels awkward, but that was freedom to me.
Yeah, I love that. Because I know, for years you would just go and sit with hospice patients, and just knowing that someone other than their family cared and was there and just wanted to be with them. And I think that does mean a lot. I think that gives us hope that even if we don't know what to say, just being there makes a big difference.
I do think that as we turn the pages here and Job responds to his friend, his first speech to me seemed over the top, maybe just a little bit. I don't want to say, again, Job has gone through something so hard. I've never gone through that. But when you hear someone say, oh, why was I born? He has these big questions for God. And he's asking these questions. Oh, why give light to those in misery and life to those who are bitter? He's so deep in grief. And you don't pop out of that grief and sadness right away. And he's really asking some tough questions, and he's really saying, okay, God, can you handle my grief? Can you handle my questions? And I guess the answer to that is yes, God can handle our grief and he can handle our questions. Absolutely. But I did start feeling as I was reading, I was like, it does seem over the top.
Yeah. Which I love this that you brought this up because as we read through the book of Job, while it seems dramatic and over the top, one thing that it helps us to remember is that Job is actually a book of poetry. And so even
Yes.
though we've just been reading through Genesis, which is history and law, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like history of this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. But Job, if we were to look at it and read it in the Hebrew, which I don't know how to read Hebrew, I'm depending on the experts to tell me this, but it's poetry. These are written in poems. So in the beginning, like you mentioned, there was once a man named Job. It's very much like the phrase once upon the time, although Job's story is
Mm,
true and not a fairy tale, but this is
right.
all poems. So, according to those who study ancient Hebrew, there are actually 4 different types of poetry in this book. The poetry we read today from Eliphaz is similar to the didactic poetry of Psalms and Proverbs, which means that it's just there to impart wisdom about life. It
Mm,
would be like someone today saying some very common phrases like, God never gives us more than we can bear. So this is what Eliphaz, when he first comes in, he's just saying all these things that are like common that you would say to someone when they're going through suffering. That is the poetry that is just these common phrases from that time. And then Job's first three friends speak in cliches of that day and age. And so as we go along, there's actually going to be a fourth friend that pops up, and we'll talk about that later. But Job's words or poems, on the other hand, aren't cliches. And so when I was looking into this, they said that in the Hebrew, all the friends are very much cliche, but Job's words, even though does use metaphors and figures of speech, they come from deep in the soul. They're
mm,
not simple cliches. God doesn't give you more than you can bear. Trust in the Lord, whatever. Prayer changes things, like all these things. His is like, it's still poetry, but it is from deep ache in his soul. And so, of course, we miss the poetry because we're reading in translation.
mm-hmm.
And they do a great job translating. Like the words are getting across, but we don't see the poem part of it. But this is an example from Job 3:9. This is how I read it in the New Living Translation. And this is talking about the day of his birth. So this is from the Bible that we're reading, the New Living Translation. This is how they translate it. It says, "Let that night be childless, let it have no joy. Let those who are experts at cursing, whose cursing could rouse Leviathan, curse that day. Let its morning stars remain dark. Let it hope for light, but in vain. May it never see morning light." So the meaning of what Job was saying is getting across. And while that's a good translation, there's a Hebrew scholar named Robert Alter, and he tried to do it more of the poetry um, from Job's time. And so this is how Robert Alter translated it in more of a poetry form. And it says, "Oh, let that night be barren, let it have no song of joy. Let the day cursers hex it, those ready to rouse Leviathan. Let its twilight stars go dark. Let it hope for day in vain, and let it not see the eyelids of dawn." Is how it would be a more
Mm,
poetic way of writing it. And this Hebrew scholar says that Job, as a poet, compares the first crack of light in the eastern horizon with the moment of the awakening of a person's eyes taking in the first light of day. And I just think that's so cool because you can picture the light in the horizon just peeking up, and that's just
mm-hmm.
like our eyes opening. And I just love that Job was poetic in the way that he was pouring out these complaints. And while this doesn't change the truth of God's word, because
Right.
they did translate it correctly, the second example just helps us to see that as we read Job, knowing that while it seems dramatic, it's poems, and he is using metaphor, or in the case of his friends, common cliches to put it into poems. And not only it's not just saying this is what happened, he wrote it in poetic form.
Well, and this also makes sense as to if this was a book on poetry, why it was placed in the Bible where it was placed,
Mm-hmm.
because we see the poems in Psalms and Proverbs, and a lot of the books of poetry are in that
Yes.
area and of the Bible. And then we have books, the history books that are in the first Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Those are all history books, and so it's fascinating just seeing and learning more and going, yes, this is why the Bible was laid out. It wasn't laid out in a perfect timeline. It was laid out because it's according to some of these books and how they were written. And so thanks for pointing that out
Yeah.
for us, Trisha. Okay, we need to take a break because we have a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, we will have the word of the day.
Surgeons keep our hearts beating. They do the amazing, help save lives, and so can you. Your CSL plasma donation can help create 24 critical life-saving medicines that can give Grandpa the chance for his heart to swell when he meets his new grandson, or give a bride the chance for her heart to skip a beat on her wedding day. Every plasma donation helps more than you know. Do the amazing. Help save lives. Donate today at your local CSL Plasma Center and be rewarded for your generosity.
Hey there, it's Nicole Eunice, host of the How to Study the Bible podcast, where every single week we join together to encounter God through His Word. You can subscribe at lifeaudio.com.
So the word of the day is testing. Now, testing means to examine, investigate, prove, or scrutinize. Now, in the Bible, when it talks about testing, it usually means the soul is being tested, which is not fun. Like, who wants our souls to be tested? Proverbs 17:3 says, "Fire tests the purity of silver and gold, but the Lord tests the heart." And what encourages me, and I think can apply to all of us, is that God knew that Job would stand faithful. Remember, God was the one that pointed out to Satan, "Look at my servant Job." And even when Job is tested, he stood firm in God. And just like Job had faith in God, God had faith in Job. And that's pretty amazing, which means that maybe when we're tested, God has faith in us too. He believes we'll stand strong. And maybe this testing is for us. Maybe God wants us to see how strong we can be and how strong our faith can be.
That's beautiful. I love that proverb that you just shared from 17 verse 3. Fire tests the purity of silver and gold, but the Lord tests the heart. That's so true. And so far, as we've read this year in 2023, we haven't seen this kind of true struggling or wrestling with God. At least we haven't seen it in the Word of God. We've seen some horrible hardships, and we've seen a lot of people going, "Okay, what's going on, God?" But we've also seen a lot of trust. And we're seeing a different story played out with Job. We're seeing someone who lost everything. I mean, his health, his children, his wealth, he lost everything but himself and his wife. And we're seeing that play out. And I think sometimes in those tests that God has on us, we expect those tests to last like 48 hours, we're done. A week, we're done. And we're seeing a test played out over time. And that's exhausting. That is exhausting. And yet we're also seeing a man come through. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. We're seeing a man come through who is being tested, and we're seeing the purity of silver and gold in his life. And I just hope and pray that in my life, when I come across tests, I can be someone that is true of too. The purity of silver and gold comes through.
Yeah,
And
I love that.
And so, we're going to see Job wrestle. We're going to see even his friends wrestle. I think everybody who walked away from this timeline, I think they're going to see God clearer, and they're going to see themselves clearer.
That is so good. And we saw Jacob wrestling with God, like in a physical form. But what if we had poems from Jacob during those years when he was like dealing with Rachel and Leah and dealing with Laban? I mean, he probably wrestled, his soul probably wrestled. But again, those were books of history and law that they're just saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened. So finally, we're getting a chance of like, okay, this is just not events happening. This is how people are feeling, and these are how people are thinking. And it relates so much to our issues today because
Yes.
we struggle with the same types of questions.
Mm-hmm. We do. Well, this is just some daily encouragement, friends, to get you into the Word. Even though today might not feel so encouraging, it really is, because we want to grow. We want to grow and we want to see God more clearly. And we want to help you be the hands and feet of Jesus. Again, if you don't have the 1-year chronological Bible that we're using, we have links to that Bible in our show notes, where you can also find that Bible in the Kindle format. And also, if you want to continue reading through your own Bible, we have a monthly and yearly schedule of the Bible reading that we are following. Those are located in the show notes. And tomorrow's reading, we're going to continue, of course, with Job, and we're going to read Job 5, chapter 5, 6, and 7. And I just want to take a second to thank the team at LifeAudio for their partnership with us on the Daily Bible Podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you will find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, also parenting, Bible study, and so much more. Go check out lifeaudio.com. Thanks for being with us today, and have a great day.
Surgeons keep our hearts beating. They do the amazing, help save lives, and so can you. Your CSL plasma donation can help create 24 critical life-saving medicines that can give Grandpa the chance for his heart to swell when he meets his new grandson, or give a bride the chance for her heart to skip a beat on her wedding day. Every plasma donation helps more than you know. Do the amazing. Help save lives. Donate today at your local CSL Plasma Center and be rewarded for your generosity.